Good evening, everyone. I welcome you all to the ICANN initiative, the Hindu and Indian Express analysis. We will start with the first topic of today. We'll first be talking about the issues related to transparency. So, any issue related to transparency, accountability, all of that will come under your GS paper 2. So now in this editorial, basically it was about an analysis of the fact that there has been a lot of opacity in the government, and so this is an analysis related to that. It is not just limited to analysis of the RTI, but in general there is a lack of culture of transparency in the country. So that is what the whole article has analyzed. So now let's analyze the various issues that were mentioned. First is related to the implementation of the RTI. Now, RTI has been enacted to ensure that there is a culture of transparency in the country, and the ministries come out with suo motu disclosure of information, and every person has a right to know under Article 21. But however, there have been several issues in implementation of the RTI. The first important issue being the backlog of the cases. So, if we talk about the Central Information Commission itself, there was a backlog of nearly 30,000 cases in 2019. So, this itself shows how seriously the RTI applications are being dealt with and how much speedily they are being dispensed with. So, the backlog of the cases is very huge, and this definitely points towards a flaw in the implementation of the RTI. And one important reason why there is such a huge backlog of cases is also because several vacancies in the information commissions have not been updated at all. So many of the posts are lying vacant. For instance, the Central Information Commission has a sanctioned strength of 11, out of which only 7 out of these 11 vacancies were full between 2016 and 2018. So even in the year 2014, when the Chief Information Commissioner had retired, even after that for 1 year, this Chief Information Commissioner post itself was vacant and no new incumbent was appointed to this position. So we know that these are the important flaws in the implementation of RTI. There is huge backlog of cases and also huge vacancies, which is also one reason why there is such huge backlog. Apart from this, when we talk about an analysis of the RTI itself, we have already discussed in one of our previous ICANN videos a detailed analysis of the Right to Information Act and the various issues in the implementation of the Act. So this we have already discussed in detail before. The second thing that this article talks about is an atmosphere of secrecy that is there in the government. So whenever information is being asked, it is rejected on one or the other pretext. So one good example for this is how the demonetization took place. So on what basis the decision was made to start demonetization? When RTI applications were received by the Reserve Bank of India, it refused these RTI applications, it did not respond to them, and it just rejected them. And therefore, we couldn't get any information about on what basis this decision was done about demonetization. So in general, we see that the home ministries and the finance ministries have rejected closely 15% of the applications that they have received, and RBI and other PSUs, the public sector, not PSUs, PSBs. So RBI and the public sector banks have rejected closely 33% of the RTI applications that they have received. So this points out to a general tendency in the country where there is still an atmosphere of secrecy even after the implementation of the RTI Act. The next important issue spoken about is the amendments that have been done to the RTI Act. So in this case, the government has also introduced several amendments which is kind of diluting the powers of the information commissions. For example, the Chief Information Commissioner had a 5-year fixed tenure and also had a fixed salary. But now an amendment has been introduced in the RTI wherein this 5-year fixed tenure of the Chief Information Commissioner and the Information Commissioners is now abolished. And also they now do not have any fixed salary anymore. Before, the Central Information Commission, that is the members of the Central Information Commission, enjoyed the same powers, or rather the tenure as well as the salary, which was equivalent to the Election Commission of India. But now it is not this so the case, and they don't enjoy any fixed tenure of 5 years, nor do they get any fixed salaries. So this way the RTI Act itself has been diluted. The next issue is related to the electoral bonds. So electoral bonds were introduced by the government in order to enable the funding by the people to the political parties. So the main purpose behind introducing the electoral bonds was that these electoral bonds they are a way of donating anonymously to the political parties. So they are in the form of bearer bonds, and on these bonds the name of the person who is donating money is not going to be written. So nobody will get to know who is this person who has donated. There is anonymity in the donations involved, which the government says is going to protect the privacy of the persons who are donating money to the political parties. So these are anonymous donations, therefore there is no transparency about who is donating how much. So this way there could be crony capitalism, wherein some of the big the companies may be donating huge amounts of money to the government and thereby driving the agenda of the government. But because of the anonymous donations through electoral bonds, nobody will ever get to know how much money a company has donated to the government. So similarly, black money can make entrance to the electoral bonds. Due to these reasons, the Election Commission of India has actually stated that this step of introducing the electoral bonds for funding the political parties is actually a retrograde step. So this you can quote in your answers when you are talking about an analysis of the electoral bonds. You can say that in the end, or wherever in the body or in the introduction, you can state this comment by the Election Commission of India itself, that ECI has stated that the introduction of electoral bonds for political funding is actually a retrograde step. And the Election Commission also says that the introduction of electoral bonds is against the is kind of violating Section 29B of Representation of People Act. So basically Section 29B was talking about donations to the political parties from government companies and also from foreign sources. So the Section 29B of RPA prevents the political parties from getting any donations from government companies and foreign sources. Now, because the electoral bonds are going to be anonymous and there is more secrecy about who is donating, you may never get to know if any government company or foreign source is actually donating to the political parties. So this will impose more secrecy in electoral funding, which is exactly what we do not want at this point of time if we are to protect democracy and also free and fair elections. So this electoral bonds and the secrecy that is involved around it may strike a blow against the free and fair elections that we carry out in India. So these are the various issues that this article dealt with while talking about the transparency related issues in India. So it is about the element of secrecy that is already there in the country, because of which information is denied whenever it is asked. Next is related to the amendments amounting to dilution of the RTI Act. Next is the issues which are related to the implementation of the RTI Act, and the electoral bonds lastly, which is introducing more secrecy in the electoral funding. So these are some of those issues which indicate that there is dilution of principle of transparency in the governance. Now we move on to the next topic. The next topic we'll be discussing is the issues related to agriculture. So agriculture and its issues, comes under GS paper 3. So if it is asked from the point of view of the farmers, it may also come under your GS paper 2. So recently we know that 3 bills have been introduced in the parliament, because of which a lot of protests are going on, out of which one of the bill that has been introduced is the Essential Commodities Amendment Bill 2020. So in this topic we will be discussing why a need was felt for amending the Essential Commodities Act. What were the essential flaws in the act that was enacted way back in 1955? So in this, the first issue was related to imposing the stock limits. So basically, when the Essential Commodities Act of 1955 was enacted, it had to give some stock limits, that these are some of the essential commodities, be it cereals or pulses, oil, seeds, potatoes, etc. So these are some of the essential commodities, and they cannot be stocked beyond a particular limit. So because if people keep stocking them, then there will be an artificial scarcity that is created in the market, and because of which there will be a price rise in the market. So in order to protect the customers, in order to protect the consumers, these stock limits were imposed. But however, this Act of 1955 did not specify a proper framework, that is, under what circumstances the stock limits have to be imposed was not clearly specified in the 1955 Act. So this particular amendment makes it very clear the circumstances under which the stock limits can be imposed. So this act clearly says that there has to be some extraordinary circumstances. For example, there is a huge price rise, or there is a war, or there is a famine, or there is a natural calamity. So these are some of those circumstances under which the stock limits can be imposed, under which the government can actually regulate these essential commodities. So this framework, under what circumstances, what extraordinary circumstances the government can regulate the supply etc. of the supply and the price and distribution of these essential commodities was not clearly specified in the 1955 Act, and through this amendment the government wants to clarify the circumstances under which the government will have the power to control the production, supply and distribution of these essential commodities. So this is the first reason why a need was felt to amend the 1955 Act. The second was the prolonged application. So earlier, whenever the stock limits were imposed under the 1955 Act, it was observed that the stock limit is imposed, but then you don't know when to remove the stock limit, when to ease out the stock limits that has been imposed by the government. So because of which, once the stock limits were imposed on rice or pulses or whatever other essential commodities, they tended to remain for a very long period of time. For example, if we talk of pulses, the stock limits were imposed from 2006 to 2017, which was a very long period for imposition of stock limits. So once imposed, it was very difficult to remove these stock limits, because it didn't mention specifically on what circumstances, again, when the extraordinary circumstances ease out, then we need to remove the stock limits. All of this was not clearly mentioned in that act. Similarly, the rice, when stock limits were imposed in 2008, it got removed only in 2014. And for oil seeds, the stock limit was there from 2008 to 2018. So these were extremely long periods of time where without any, there was nothing in the act, and once the stock limits were imposed, then it was very difficult to remove the stock limits. And there was also no transparency and accountability that these stock limits have to be eased out after certain months or certain years. So there was no such transparency also. But what this particular act seems to achieve is it tries to come out with a proper criteria on imposing the stock limits, and therefore it is made more transparent and more accountable regarding the imposition and the easing of the stock limits. So this was a second reason why a need was felt to amend the 1955 Act. The third important reason was India has transformed from a food scarce country to a food surplus country. So when the Essential Commodities Act was introduced in 1955, India was a very different country. India was facing a lot of food scarcity. We were also dependent on imports from the United States under the PL 480 program. But now we are a food surplus country. We are not just self-sufficient when it comes to the food grains. We are also exporting it to the outside world. So we have transformed from this food scarce to a food surplus country. So in this regard, when we talk of wheat, the production of wheat over these years after independence has increased by 10 times, the production of rice has increased by 4 times, and the production of pulses has increased by 2.5 times. So therefore, during that time, because the food grains were itself, they were more scarce, it was felt that the food grains are already scarce. So if the scarce food grains are ended up stocked up, if they are stocked up rather than being sold in the market, as I said earlier, just stocking it up will create artificial scarcity in the market. It will lead to shooting up of the prices in the market, and it will ultimately hurt the consumers. So it was felt that because India is already a food scarce country and people need food, there is no point in stocking this food beyond a certain limit. So it was in those circumstances that the Essential Commodities Act 1955 was introduced. But now, as we know, we are a food self-sufficient country. We are also a net global exporter when it comes to the food grains. So now we cannot think that we should not stock food beyond a certain limit, otherwise it is going to create scarcity in the market. So therefore this is a time, because of this transformation from a food scarce to a food surplus country, it is a right time when we need to introduce some changes in the act, because the 1955 act was enacted in a completely different set of circumstances. The last reason for coming out with this amendment is that the earlier act was actually proved to be a hurdle for investment in the agriculture sector. So why is it so? Because under the Essential Commodities Act 1955, there were stock limits that were imposed on these essential commodities. These essential commodities couldn't be stored beyond a certain amount of stock. So when these commodities should not be stocked at all, then what is the need to invest in storage infrastructure for these kind of commodities? What is the need to invest in cold chains and storage facilities for the perishable items when they are not even supposed to be stocked beyond a certain limit? So this led to is that the private investment in the agriculture, whether it is for creating godowns and storage facilities, for creating warehouses, for creating the cold chain infrastructure, the private investment in this creating the agricultural logistics actually reduced to a large extent, because of the feeling that what good is the investment to build some storages and warehouses when these essential commodities cannot even be stored beyond a particular amount of stock. So this actually led to a lot of hindrances and hurdles for investment in the agriculture sector by the private sector. So by now easing out this, we are also looking for the private sector to come and invest in creating the agri infrastructure. So these are the important reasons why the Essential Commodities Act 1955 is now being amended by the government with the introduction of the Essential Commodities Amendment Bill 2020. So now we move on to the next topic. The last topic we are going to be discussing today is related to the regulation of media. So anything that is related to media and the regulation can be a part of your GS2, because the regulatory bodies and all that come under your GS paper 2. And also media is one of the fourth pillar of the democracy, and is it makes sure that the freedom of speech and expression, etc. is actually implemented. So therefore it comes under your GS paper 2. So when we talk of media, in the recent ICANN videos, we have discussed about the Sudarshan TV episode. So there have been a lot that is going on related to how these TV channels, they sensationalize something, or they kind of create enmity among the different groups in the country, or the social media, which is a very huge and wide reach. So when media is such a potent tool through which information can be disseminated to a large number of population, regulation of media becomes very important. But however, how is it that media needs to be regulated becomes the most important question. Because while we agree that media is to be regulated, but if we what happens is that if we end up over-regulating the media, then we are going to curb the freedom of expression under Article 19, and we are going to curb the power of the press itself. So therefore we need to make sure that while media is being regulated, to ensure that it does not cross its limits, but at the same time we need to ensure that this doesn't end up being over-regulation and it stifles the freedom of the expression of media. So in this case, there are basically three models, whether it could be government regulation, it could be self-regulation by the media house itself, or it could be an independent regulation, which is like a third-party regulation, which is neither by the government nor by the media house, but an independent third body is going to regulate the media. So these are the three popular models of media regulation. So now let us analyze this. When we talk of the government regulations, usually what happens is when the government tries to regulate the media, it may be possible that it ends up interfering in the independence of the media. So thereby it violates Article 19 of the Constitution, and these regulations may be so much that it amounts to interference which shouldn't be done. But at the same time, the government also already has its regulations put in place in the form of cable television network rules and so on. So these regulations are already there, and what is more important is to ensure that these regulations are implemented. So however, these regulations must not amount to interference which can violate Article 19 of the Constitution. So more often than not, government regulations are not usually welcomed because they might end up interfering with the media independence. So let's say we do not go by this model. The next model that is available is a self-regulation, where the media house will regulate its own content and the way it is giving out its content to the people. So this self-regulation again, it has not been very successful because it is completely upon the media house to regulate its own self, and often they do not end up regulating themselves. So even self-regulation has become a failure, and it has not shown good results for us. So the only option that is left with us is an independent regulation. So in an independent regulation, there is usually a third body which is going to regulate the media. So this third body is not controlled by the government, it is not controlled by the media houses themselves. So it is completely a third party, an independent party, which is going to regulate the media. But also these days a fourth model of regulation has come into picture, which is a self-independent regulation. It has elements of both self-regulation as well as independent regulation. So one classic example of this is the NBSA. So NBA is a News Broadcasters Association that was set up, I think, in 2008. After this, NBA set up its own body which is called as News Broadcasters Standards Authority. So this is going to maintain the standards of the news that is channeled in various channels. So this association there, which it is an independent body. Why is it an independent body? If it is an independent body, then why are we calling it self-independent regulation? Because its composition is like 4 plus 4 plus 1. There are 4 members who belong to the media editors part, and then 4 other members who are independent eminent members who have no connection whatsoever with the media, and there is 1 chairman. So therefore these 4 people belong to the media. These 4 people are just eminent citizens who don't belong anywhere to the media, and then there's 1 chairman, and that is why it becomes a self plus independent regulation model. So when this was done, when NBSA was formed, it was also chaired by J.S. Verma. So J.S. Verma, you may know, is a very popular justice, and so when J.S. Verma became the chairperson of this, the NBA also, even though NBA created the NBSA, NBA being the parent body never interfered in the working of NBSA. So there was complete non-interference. Many cases the NBSA imposed heavy cash fines on its own members. So it shows how impartial it was, how independent it was, and NBA being the parent body never interfered in the functioning of NBSA. So this was going, but however there were several shortcomings in the functioning of NBSA. The first shortcoming is regarding the voluntary memberships. So NBSA it was a body wherein the membership was voluntary. Not all the news channels, not all the TV channels were supposed to be mandatorily members of NBSA. So it was based on voluntary membership. Whoever wants to be a member can be a member, but it was not mandatory for all the TV channels to become the members of NBSA. So first thing is that it was just based on voluntary membership, and secondly, whatever judgments or orders it gives, it was only to its members. It was applicable only to those members only. Now supposing if NBSA gives an order against one of the members and that member doesn't like the order given by the NBSA, then the TV channel can happily walk out of NBSA, saying that it no longer belongs to NBSA and therefore the judgments etc. is not applicable on it. So whatever NBSA decides is applicable only to the members, and the members can walk out anytime. So, and also the NBSA did not have the authority or the backing to enforce whatever judgment or order it is giving. because it had no legal backing. So it was neither a constitutional body nor was it a statutory body. So it has basically no legal backing. So because of which its authority to enforce its judgments or orders was also very less. So these were the various shortcomings that were associated with BSA. So this brings us to one of the important case studies in UK, which is called as the Ofcom, which is the Office of Communication. So this Ofcom can be quoted as a case study whenever you're writing regarding the regulation of media. So why is Ofcom definitely a successful model over our NBSA is because, first of all, this is created by an act of the Parliament. The function that NBSA does or Ofcom does is the same. So it is basically a regulatory and a competition authority. So it also deals with the competition issues. So it is a regulatory and a competition authority, but it is created by an act of the Parliament. So because it is a statutory body, it has that legal backing which gives it that power and authority to enforce its decisions. Secondly, because it is created by an act of the Parliament, the Ofcom is also responsible and accountable to the Parliament. So Ofcom will be questioned for its omissions and commissions. So it is responsible for the Parliament. So it keeps Ofcom more accountable. Also, at the same time, having a statutory backing gives it that authority which is required to enforce its decisions. And also, in fact, recently, UK government has also said that Ofcom has been working really well, and so therefore they are planning to integrate within Ofcom, give it another additional role that of the internet regulation. So Ofcom will now have a greater role in the internet regulation also, because as we know that social media and other internet based platforms are used for propagating some harmful or illegal content. So Ofcom will also have a greater role to play in the internet regulation. So this is what the UK government has said. So this shows how having a statutory backing can give it so much more authority over its decisions, and this model can be followed in India as well. So when we talk of the way forward, there are several things that we can simultaneously explore and discuss and then arrive at one particular solution. One of the option is to take up NBSA and give it statutory backing, so thereby giving it more authority. So that is one option. Second is to have a Supreme Court appointed monitoring panel. So this panel is going to be appointed by the Supreme Court, which is going to be independent in nature and is going to report to the Supreme Court about whatever monitoring is happening. So it is a Supreme Court appointed independent monitoring panel which can regulate the media. The third is to appoint a constitutionally appointed body. So we need to create a constitutional body for regulation of the media. This is another option. So for example, there was Election Commission of India. So Election Commission was actually given, was empowered by the Supreme Court in 2002 that the Election Commission, being a constitutional body, should enforce this model code of conduct which the political parties had come together and voluntarily decided to observe the model code of conduct. But however, even when the political parties had decided voluntarily to observe the model code of conduct, it would have always been observed in breach. So Supreme Court in 2002 empowered the Election Commission to monitor and enforce the model code of conduct among the political parties. So Election Commission, being a constitutional body, was given this power to enforce the model code of conduct. Similarly, we can have a constitutionally appointed body which will end up regulating the media. So these are the various options which are available to us when we talk of regulating the media, and based on our discussions and what the pros and the cons and analysis of it, we can come down to a decision as to what model is going to suit best for India and what needs to be adopted. So these were the other articles that were not important from your exam point of view or that we have already discussed. This was related to India, China. We have discussed. This is the NGO issues, which we have already discussed multiple times. Then again, this is again India, China. We have already discussed. So these were the other issues. Education policy, NEP, we have already discussed. So these were the other issues that were not important from your exam point of view. So last week I had asked you to come out with doubts in the comment section, which I will be dealing with. So one of the mostly asked doubt was to give you a strategy for 2021 exam if you are preparing for the same. So I have already made a video of a strategy for 2021 exam, which I'll be uploading in a couple of hours on my channel. So those who want to see the 2021 strategy can check that out. So thank you. Have a great day.